With great power comes great responsibility.
Compromise where you can. Where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right. Even if the whole world is telling you to move. It is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say no. You move.
Never step onto the battlefield of ideas unprepared. Before you enter the fray, you need a plan. And there's no better place to get one than right here on Tactics with host Caleb Colquitt. The Situation Room goes live now on News Radio 1440.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Tactics, where speech isn't violence, tolerance isn't love, and disagreement isn't hate. We, of course, appreciate you being on the program whenever you are able to be with us. We appreciate that you make us a part of your busy day, whether you're joining us on YouTube or Facebook or Twitch or Twitter or Periscope. If you're listening to us on the podcast at tacticsradio.com, if you're listening to us on the broadcast, because it's a Thursday show, so it'll probably wind up on the replay on News Radio 1440 on the weekends. However you're listening to us, we certainly appreciate you being with us today. And before we do jump into the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about, a couple of very quick housekeeping kind of things. First of all, you may have noticed that we've been switching up the time every day this week. We've been doing a different time. We've done, I think we've done 6, 7, and 8. And so all day this week, we've been testing out different times. And so since you've had a full week to kind of see all the different shows and what times they come on and what time is most convenient for you, be sure to comment in the comment section what time works best for you, which time do you personally like the best, and we'll try to take that under advisement as we're trying to settle on a time that works best for the show. We really are trying to accommodate you, the listener, as much as humanly possible. And a couple other things. First of all, there will be, for certain, no show on Monday. And the reason that there's not going to be a show on Monday is because we are actually hosting right here at Faulkner University, in corroboration with our sister station, Sports Radio 740, the championship of the first ever Sports Radio 740 game room at Faulkner University. That's right, we'll be doing a broadcast live right here on campus, not in the studio, even though we may actually do something in this studio. I'm not really sure. But we will be broadcasting live from the multiplex over there, and there will be people from the Sports Radio 740 game room like myself there. And we will also have Sports Radio 740's Joe Hunk and Russell Terry and their entire crew is coming down here to do their broadcast from Faulkner University. So the show will be done there. We'll be having our video game tournament there for the championship for the NCAA football playoffs. Of course, that's the night of the national championship for NCAA football. So all of that is going on Monday. So I highly, highly encourage you to check in on that. I'll be over in the Sports Radio 740 game room. So obviously can't be in two places at once. I'm going to be over there. So we won't have a show on Monday. And that actually winds up working out really well for us. We may not have any shows Tuesday or Wednesday, maybe even Thursday either. I hope that's not the case. I'm going to try to get everything back up and running by Tuesday. The reason for that is I'm building a brand new PC. And because you guys know I'm a massive tech geek, I would love to just sit here and talk about my new PC that I'm building right now, but I can. I'm not going to bore you with those details. I know that's not why you're on the show, but I'm going to be building a brand new PC, and that's going to allow us to do a lot of really cool things here at Tactics Radio on News Radio 1440. That's going to let us do a whole bunch of new things with video production that we've not been able to do before. It's going to make my job easier. It's going to make making features more readily available on the website and other places easier just because I have more processing power. I'll be able to do more videos. I'll be able to edit the videos better than I did in the past. Everything's going to be run a little bit smoother. So we do a pretty good job now, but with the addition of this new PC, which is going to be very powerful, that's going to help us bring the show even further, and hopefully you guys will be able to notice that. I mean, I don't know if you will or not. Maybe I'm wasting all my time and money here, but maybe you guys will notice the upgrade once it takes place. Hopefully that will be the case. So we do have a lot to get to in the realm of politics today, particularly, just like always, at Tactics Radio, local news does take priority. And we have some interesting local news. It's really in the season right now that you've got a handful of legislatures getting ready to see what the legislative schedule is going to look like in the state of Alabama. And so you're seeing every once in a while a tidbit of a really interesting law come through, and there's certainly no exception to this. Representative Chris Pringle, I believe he's from Rogersville, if I'm not mistaken. Chris Pringle has pre-filed a bill about transgender athletes. So this is really interesting, and I think that there's some pros and cons to this particular bill, and you guys know where I stand from a moral perspective, of course, and also just from a pragmatic perspective when it comes to male athletes competing against female athletes. But I do think that the bill has some strengths and weaknesses, and I want to kind of go over those, and I want your feedback, and also want you to get in touch, especially if you're from somebody, if you happen to be one of our listeners inside Pringle's jurisdiction, his district, as it were. If you could just talk to him about this, I think that this would really help. So this bill that he has pre-filed and getting ready for the new legislative session that's coming up very soon, he mandates in this bill that every entrant into a sport for Alabama public schools is sorted by the gender on their birth certificate. Now, in principle, and I'm going to get into this a little bit further, but I also want to get to the criticisms. In principle, I totally agree with this bill. And we've seen in other states, one in New Jersey is the one that stands out in my mind, the detrimental effect that it's had not only on the sport itself and the enjoyment of it, but also to the athletes that compete. And those are the ones that are really hurt by it, because in high school sports, yes, there is an entertainment aspect to it. That is true. But, and this should be the way that it is in college as well, even though it tends to not be, unfortunately, in some cases. It's not primarily a venue for entertainment. That's there, and there's nothing wrong with that. But primarily what high school athletics or elementary athletics or even college athletics is supposed to be is an activity on campus to serve the students and the student body. That should be the primary goal. And if anything other than that starts interfering with that goal, then it's time to start asking questions of whether or not that practice should be done away with. And when I say practice, I mean the practice interrupting that goal, not the sport itself. And so when you're looking at the high school sports and the high school athletics of things that have happened in New Jersey, for example, you see in New Jersey they had a case where there were two trans women, in other words, guys that dress like women. They had two trans women, men dressing like women, engaging in female track and field. And what happened is they very quickly broke every single record on the state books. It wasn't even close. And when they went to the state championship, they just literally ran past everybody. It wasn't even close. They obliterated the competition, which makes sense because they're men. It would be just as unfair to have them racing against women as it would be to include men that dress like men and think they're men. And so it's just absolutely absurd what they allowed to happen, and the victims in that were not even really the spectators or the parents, because granted it would have been a boring race, I assume, except for maybe the top two who were biological men, and so they could compete with one another. The real losers in that were the girls that participated, the women that no longer are able to compete. They can't keep up with a male runner. Science just does not back that up. Men and women are too biologically different in that sport. Now, there are some things where men can absolutely compete with women, and it's not unfair at all. I was in the FFA. Just about, to my knowledge, there are not any competitions that are not co-ed. No competitions that are not for men and women. And why is that? Because our competitions, the nature of them is not athletic, and men do not have an inherent advantage over women in that area. Take the contest that I was most involved in, extemporaneous speaking, or parliamentary procedure, a debate contest. Those are things that women can compete with men on an even playing field because they have the same abilities. My team was 3 boys and 3 girls. And believe me, that was not done because we engineered a team to try to have even numbers of men and women. My dad was the kind of coach that he didn't give a crap whether it was all men, all women, didn't matter to him. He picked the best team. Whoever was the best got on that team because there were teams beforehand. With my friend Alex Popple, who's actually now with another one of our partners over at the Prattville Patriots. He was on that same debate team a few years before I was. He was the only guy. Why? Because those 5 girls were better than all the guys that tried out for the team. We had teams that were almost all men. I think it was one of our earlier teams, but there was only one girl on it. I believe it was Vicky. And I cannot remember her last name. I don't have the memory of all my dad's students like that. But we had teams where there was only one girl. We've had all boy teams. I think at one time we had an all girl team. None of that was done because we were trying to make it one way or the other. It's just the best person got on the team. You could do that with athletics. The problem is, if you do, what is going to happen is that you're going to have all men. Like, if we did that same thing, and that is fair, if we did the same thing with basketball, the WNBA would just not exist. And I don't have a problem with the WNBA existing. They're women competing against other women. That's fair. But we could just combine the two and say, okay, the best athletes just get it, and then there would just be no female athletes. See, that's the thing that people that are pushing this agenda fail to understand and grasp. The reason that we have sports divided into men and women is because women needed a venue in which they could be competitive. Because if they were competing against men, it just wasn't going to happen. And I've got no problem with women's softball. Heck, I did women's softball a couple times, filling in and helping out with women's softball when I was on the radio at Auburn Network. I got no problem with women's sports. I'm a fan of it. It gives them a place where they can be competitive and get a lot of the same advantages, get the same kind of life lessons that men get from sports. Things like teamwork, cooperation, dedication, hard work. Those are all things that benefit women. And by trying to make this gender neutral field, you are taking that away from women. The whole reason we carved out a place for women's sports is so they could get the same advantages that men get from those sports. And by robbing them of that, you're really taking away something that made them in a lot of ways equal. Not equal in the sense that they could do the same things as a man, but equal in the sense that they got the same benefits out of school activities that men did. And now you're trying to take that away. That's what is really so astounding about this whole thing. But here's the thing. Even though I agree with all of that, you know where I stand on that. Here's where this bill goes wrong. You see, it's very poorly constructed, because if your goal is to keep only men competing with other men and only women competing with other women, 100% there with you on that. Could not be more, in the same line of thinking with Representative Pringle than I am right now. The problem is this bill does not do that because it's poorly constructed. And so, just to give you an understanding of why I say that, remember that the bill specifically mandates every entrant to the sport is sorted by the gender on their birth certificate. Here's the problem with that. 6 states now allow for children to be born as no gender. There are 6 states right now where if you're a parent and you want your child to be born gender neutral, you can opt out of having the name on the gender, or it'll be gender X or something like that. That's up to the parent. And so what happens when a kid that was born in California or New York or Vermont moves to Alabama and they say, you have to enter the sport based on the one on your birth certificate, and they show the birth certificate and it says gender X. Well, what the heck do you do with that? You see the problem here? It's the guy's kind of behind the 8 ball on this one because of the way that it's worded. Another one, 38 states, so not exactly a minority. Over 2/3 of the states now allow for gender correction on their birth certificate. So in other words, if you're a girl and you grow up and all of a sudden decide, no, I'm a boy, There are states, 38 of them, which do allow you. Some have stricter regulation on how that works than others. For example, some it's just whatever you feel like. Some it's if you've actually had the surgery. Some of them it's you have to have a court order to do it. And so there is a lengthy process that you go through. But either way, there are 38 states that in one form or another allow for people to correct their gender on their birth certificates. And so what happens when you have a trans student? I mean, you would have a trans student, but a transfer student. What happens when you have a transfer student come in and show you their birth certificate and it says, "Oh, yeah, well, your birth certificate says you're a man. You've clearly got boobs, but it says you're a guy, so that's the one you're allowed to compete in." And again, the one I'm more worried about is the opposite. Well, your birth certificate says you're a girl. I mean, you've got danglers, but it says you're a woman, therefore you can compete in the woman's sport. So it's a really poorly worded bill. It's not exactly airtight. And here's the crazy thing about it. You would think, oh, well, all those things would happen if kids were born or had their gender changed in a different state other than Alabama and transferred in. Here's the problem with that. According to Alabama Code 229A19, it does allow for the change of a gender marker with a court order, quote, indicating that the sex of an individual born in this state has been changed by surgical procedure. So not only would you have to worry about transfer students from other states who either live in a state where they can mark their gender as neutral upon birth or can go back and retroactively alter the gender on their birth certificate, even in the state of Alabama, this law wouldn't work. Because you have the ability through, if you've had a surgical procedure, to alter your gender, which does nothing to your athletic ability. I mean, I guess if they pump you full of estrogen, again, not something that you have to do if you have the surgery, but if they pump you full of estrogen, that's going to hurt a male's athletic ability some. But as we've seen before, time and time again, not enough to where they wouldn't just completely blow past every woman they're competing against in high school sports. Even in the state of Alabama, this bill doesn't make any sense. He needs to word it something like your biological gender or something to that effect, because doing it with the gender that's on your birth certificate, that ain't helping anybody. And rest assured, granted, transgender people, it's a very, very small part of the population. But granted, the people that do that most of them kind of consider themselves activists and have probably already gone through the process of changing the gender on their birth certificates. Now, whether or not all of them go through the surgical procedure, actually very few go through the entirety of the surgical procedure. Most just change trying to be delicate here, just the top part and the face and that kind of thing, and don't actually do the bottom surgery. But the point is that this is something that is even possible to get around within the state of Alabama. And so this bill is far from airtight. It definitely needs to be reworked from a legal perspective. This bill would also forbid the school from acting as a facility to such events. So in other words, not only could schools not have school events where you could swap genders and go in and out like this, you wouldn't even be able to host an event where there were men competing against women and vice versa. Again, I don't see that that's going to be much of an issue, but fine. I don't oppose that part of the bill. I just think that it's kind of worthless because of the birth certificate stipulation. This bill also exempts any events that include boys and girls. Yeah, again, that's good. Because like I said, there's plenty of events like in the FFA, not athletic events, obviously, but plenty of events where, you have girls competing against guys because there's no difference in the performance. So, why not? And then I did think that this was pretty funny. The bill is actually called the Gender is Real Legislative Act, or the GIRL Act. And this was a quote by Representative Pringle. Gender is real. There are biological differences between boys and girls that influence athletic performance. The GIRL bill seeks to support female student athletes so that they may compete against each other and not have to compete against male students with an unfair advantage. Now, again, I wholeheartedly agree with this. And I think that women are the primary ones that are hurt by this because in a guy's sport, Having a girl that's going to finish last in every race because she thinks she's a guy, that really doesn't hurt you. The only way I could see that would be a problem in verse is if a girl wanted to join the school wrestling team. And then, because I'll be honest with you, back when I did Taekwondo, because remember, I'm a martial artist as well. Back when I did Taekwondo, I lost every match I ever sparred against a girl in because I didn't fight them. Like I would block, but I would never throw a punch or a kick just because I don't believe in doing that. And I lost an awful lot of matches doing that. But it went against my belief system. And so I could see it being an issue there too. But that's really the only men's sport I think that would be negatively affected, at least for the men. This is primarily to protect female athletes from being just, steamrolled by male athletes. And I agree with Representative Pringle's goal here. I just think that this is not the right way to do it because I don't think that it's going to be effective in actually doing what he claims he wants it to do. So that's really the issue that I'm running up against here. And Representative Pringle also said, quote, liberal Democrats are always trying to accuse us of refusing science, but gender is a real biological truth. It defies logic that anyone would deny science and want male students to compete in female sports. Now, again, I don't disagree with anything that Representative Pringle is saying here per se, but I do think that we can think a little bit deeper. And what I mean by that is, he's absolutely right, but the question is why? Why is it that so many people on the left, or liberal Democrats as he calls them, why is it that they do want to refuse science? Why is it that they are rejecting what is known to them as the gender norm or whatever? Really, it does go back to this idea of everything ought to be fair. And they think that women and men ought to be equal, which is a sentiment I agree with, but unfortunately they confuse being the same as being equal. Men and women can be equal without being the same, and I'm not going to go off into my entire theology on this. That's, I've done that several times. But suffice it to say that they think that because men and women ought to be equal, and because in their mind, equal and same are the same thing. They don't see any difference between the two. It's like the two words are synonyms. You can definitely be equal without being the same. And to use the analogy that I've used 1,000 times, which part is more equal in writing a letter, the pen or the piece of paper? Well, you kind of need both. Are they the same? No, they're not the same at all. But both parts are equally needed to write a letter. And so you got to have both to make the thing work. So you can't say that one is more equal than the other. They're equally needed, but they're not the same. And that's the way that relationships between men and women work. And because of that, they want to extend that to physical abilities. They want to pretend as though, and there are people on the left that are saying this. I can't tell you the number of articles that I've read where they're saying that the idea that men are stronger than women is a myth, and the idea that they're physically in better shape and can do more is a myth. It's so stupid because obviously men are more athletic. There's a reason that like I said, the very existence of women's sports suggests that. Look at the Olympics. The Olympics, I think, so far, has handled this extremely well. Now, unfortunately, that may change in the coming years, but think about this. For decades now, what happens when a woman wins a gold medal? She gets a gold medal. What happens when a man gets a gold medal? He wins a gold medal and gets to take that home. When he wins first place, he gets a gold. When she wins first place, she gets a gold. Why? Because they're competing against people whom it is fair for them to compete against. So they are equal, but they are not the same, which is why those distinctions exist in the first place. So this is the thing that I find really strange about this, going back to the why they believe this. They think that men and women need to be physically exactly the same in order for them to be equal, and so they just kind of idealistically say, well, this is the way it should be, therefore this. Here's the thing that I find so ridiculous about that. Women's bodies are freaking amazing. Not only are they far more attractive than ours, and I'm not just saying that because I'm straight. I mean, you look at the modeling industry, for example. Women are paid ridiculous amounts more than men are. Why? Because female beauty is valued more than male beauty. And for the same reason, male athletes are paid significantly more than female athletes. Our athleticism is more impressive than women's athleticism. Their beauty is more impressive than our beauty. The female body is a work of art. As Elaine once said on Seinfeld, the male body, it's utilitarian, it's for getting around, it's like a Jeep. And she's not wrong about that. Our bodies are different because they're designed to do different things. And here's the kicker on all this. Women, your bodies have the ability to grow a freaking human inside of it for 9 months, expel that human to where he's a completely alive, living, breathing, different individual, and then after that, your bodies can then feed him. Really, you're upset about this. And the only thing that men have to that is like, yeah, well, I can jump higher and I can lift heavy things. Like, really? There's no comparison there. The idea that women's bodies are less significant or less equal because they can't jump further or run as fast is stupid. I don't understand how they even got to this place. Of course, and regardless of what the trans activists say, men can't have babies. It's just not a thing. Never happened in history, never going to happen in the future. A male cannot have a baby. And that's fine. We have different roles, we're good at different things, and we complement one another. Think about this. The reason that it's better for a man to have around, even if you don't adopt a godly worldview, even if this isn't coming from the Bible, psychologically speaking, the reason that women like somebody that can run faster and jump higher is because they need a man. And this is the reason that they've, been around ever since the cave people and marriage has existed, is she wants a commitment from a man who can protect her and can go hunt and go gather and would be better at plowing fields or whatever else, providing sustenance for her and her infant when she's in a vulnerable state and has to take care of a baby. You see, our bodies, whether you have a godlike worldview or you believe that it was all just, random and we evolved like this, are specifically catered to and designed for specific attributes. We have those attributes, we're better at those attributes, and that's the reason that men and women go well together. It just blows my mind that they want to destroy that and blow it all up when women have by far the more impressive feat with their body. I mean, there's just no comparison there. Men and women have always been designed to be equals and complement one another. I mean, the very word, going to the Bible here, when the Bible describes in Genesis that God is going to create a helper for Adam, do you know that the word helper actually means equal? And the verse right beforehand, where it's talking about he's going through and there was no body that was there that was a helper that was adequate for Adam, what he's saying is there's nothing in the animal kingdom that's an equal. There's nothing that was there that was a significant equal for Adam, and so God created a woman. And so from the very beginning of time, the idea of men and women being equal but different has always been around. That's always been something that was true. Because if the world weren't like that, if the world were all men or all women, or we were some kind of hermaphroditic race, that would just suck. We should be celebrating this uniqueness and celebrating the differences in men and women, not pretending like they don't exist. All right, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back in just a moment on tactics.
And now for a reading from the Social Justice Warrior Bible with Pastor Gregory Post.
Welcome in. I'm Gregory Post, head pastor at the Eternal Living Word Trans-Denominational Community Church and Coffee House in Novato, California. And now it's time once again for another reading of the SJW Bible. Today's story is going to be about how Naaman was cured of his leprosy in 2 Kings, chapter 5, verses 8 through 14. And it says, "It happened when Elisha, the man and or woman of God, depending on how he identified at the time, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes. And he sent word to the king, saying, 'Why have you torn your clothes? Now let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel.' So Naaman came with his horse and his chariots, which were sustainably raised and emitted no greenhouse gases, and stood at the doorway of the house of Elisha. Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, 'Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored to you, and you will be clean.' Not that I'm implying that you were dirty just because you were a leper. That would be leper shaming. But Naaman was furious and went away, saying, 'Behold, I thought, he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and wave his hand all over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Paphra and the rivers of Damascus better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?' So he turned and went away in rage. Then his servants came near and spoke to him, saying, 'Wow, that Elisha guy is such a xenophobic jerk. Where does he get off implying that the rivers in Israel are better than the rivers in our country? That nationalist jerk probably believes in Israeli exceptionalism too.' So then God spoke to Naaman directly and said, 'Naaman, I am so sorry for being intolerant and not accommodating enough. I should never have asked you to have to go and do something to be cured. You believe in me, and since purification comes from faith only, I'll just go ahead and heal you right here and now.' And from that hour forward, his flesh was cured, and they all went out to try some local craft beer." Wow, so inspirational. Thank you for listening to this reading of the SJW Bible. And remember, the only truth that matters is your truth.
Welcome back, everybody, and thank you so much for being with us. So, a couple of stories that I did want to mention. Nick Sandmann, who you may remember, he was one of the Covington kids, the main one that they accused of smirking. Apparently, it's a crime to smirk now. But anyway, with all that thing where CNN and the Washington Post and all these different news entities just completely railroaded him and tried to make what he was doing into something that it wasn't, and tried to say that he was disrespecting the Native American guy that was there beating a drum in his face and all this other stuff. And you remember that if you watch the tape, the 3-hour long tape that was released online, and saw it in context, it said literally the exact opposite of what was going on, and it was really just a media rage story. And what happened is it turned out that the media got everything completely wrong and completely slandered the guy. And because of that, he wound up suing them and a lot of people, including Jim Carrey and Alyssa Milano and a whole bunch of news outlets. And CNN has actually settled out of court with him. Now, it was an undisclosed amount, but he originally sued them for like 270 million. I don't know how much of that he got, but even if it was just a few million, I mean, that kid's college is taken care of for the rest of his life. That guy's set. So he get at the very least get like a college education and then a whole lot more. So, I mean, good for him. Those guys just absolutely went after him, did no fact checking, manufactured a story out of whole cloth to try to smear the kid. And even though I'm concerned about that, because I am concerned about justice, the main thing that I was really concerned about, and what I really want to make a point to bring up here, is that maybe from now on, CNN and some of the other guys that just see a story and pounce on it because it fits their agenda without considering whether or not, it's actually true or not, maybe they'll just exercise a little bit more caution. Granted, I'm not holding my breath, but maybe they'll at least think, we should look into this before we just run with it because it makes us feel good. Because it's a chance to go after a private school white kid wearing a MAGA hat. Maybe we should see, hey, is that really what happened, or is this just a visceral reaction by us? And that's something that would be good across the entirety of the media. Because even though I think that they're a lot more cautious about it, and I'm glad for that, conservative media outlets sometimes jump to conclusions on things as well. And so I think this should be a lesson to all of us in the media, myself included, to remember that just because a story fits your narrative doesn't mean you need to run with it before you have all the facts. And I hope that that is the case. Now, there's another big story out. A Ukraine airliner bound for Kyiv crashes over Iran. Now, this happened the night of the missile attack, and Iran has recently reported that the black boxes inside the airplane were damaged, and there was memory loss and all this other stuff. So this is a report via the BBC. Quote, in total, 82 Iranians, 63 Canadians, were on board the Kyiv-bound Ukraine International Airlines flight PS 752. Ukraine's foreign minister, Vadim Pyresko, said there were also 11 victims, including 9 crew members from Ukraine, Afghans, 4 Britons, 3 Germans. Iran's head of emergency operations said 147 of the victims were Iranian, which suggests many of the foreign nationals held dual nationality. Now, I know that math was kind of murky because, like I said, there were a lot of them with dual nationalities. But if you add all that up, it's 176 people aboard that plane, and there were no survivors. So regardless of the circumstances surrounding everything, that's a horrible story that we had 176 people just lost like that. But the interesting thing here is that the Iranians have basically said nobody is allowed to look into this. We're not going to have Americans look into this. And you might say, well, why would they have Americans look into it in the first place? Well, a couple reasons. First of all, we're in the area because we have a consulate right next to them, right on their border practically in Baghdad, which is the one that was attacked and resulted in the death of Soleimani. The second is, when it comes to aviation, America's kind of the standard. In fact, I didn't know this until my recent trip to Ukraine, ironically enough. It turns out that if you're in aviation, if you're going to be a pilot, you must speak English. And the reason is because Americans invented aviation. And so if you're going to be in that sphere, you pretty much have to speak English. Now, you can be a member of the crew in an airplane and not speak English, but all the pilots have to speak English because they don't want there to be a language barrier there in case of some kind of emergency. And so no matter what your original language is, no matter what airline you're working for, if you're going to be a pilot, you must speak English. Which is part of the reason that America's kind of the head over all of that, is because we kind of set the standards on things since we invented aviation in the first place. So because of that, they've said they're not allowed in, and then the Ukrainians said, well, just let us and our inspectors come in, and they said no to that as well. The only ones that are allowed to do the inspection and to try to recover all of this are going to be Iranian inspectors, ones that would be employed by their state. So it looks super sketchy. And there's a good reason that this would evoke some kind of thoughts of maybe there's a cover-up going on here. The popular theory is that what happened to this airline is that it was actually hit by one of the missiles that were launched at the United States military bases. Now, they believe it was unintentional. They're not saying that Iran shot the plane out of the sky for no reason. But they're saying that they either weren't cautious enough or whatever. But these ground-to-ground missiles that were launched, they're saying that one of them might have inadvertently hit this airplane that was bound for the Ukraine. So, it's possible. And it's really the only thing so far that makes any sense, at least based on the story and the details that I've heard. And Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau, now remember, Justin Trudeau is the woke prince. I mean, he's about as far on the left as a person can be. He's not somebody that would be the stereotypical cartoon caricature of what liberals would think of as a warmonger or a tin hat wearing conspiracy theorist. He's not an Alex Jones type or anything like that. Frankly, I don't care for the guy's politics much, But even he came out and said, based on what he's seen, he thinks that what happened is that they were shot out of the sky. Now, remember that this was a plane that was carrying 63 Canadians. So it's understandable why his country has a vested interest in finding out what happened. And he called for a full and very thorough investigation, which was the right thing to do. Now, at the end of the day, I am incredibly distraught at this, even though I'm glad that there were no American lives lost in that missile attack. If this was an unfortunate side effect of Iran doing this, that's just a horrible thing, because obviously, even if it was just some kind of mechanical failure, which is the Iranian story, the one that they're running with right now, even if it was just some kind of random mechanical failure, which seems unlikely, that's still a horrible thing that 76 people died. No matter what the rationale behind it was, but what is really horrible about this, and I stand by everything that I said yesterday about the strike from Iran, is that it seemed to be largely symbolic. They were intentionally trying not to hurt anybody. They just wanted to save face. Think about that. That means 176 people, if that is true, and I believe that it is. 176 people died because Iran was afraid of their reputation. I wonder, throughout all the annals of time, and I'm sure the number is staggering, how many people died because of pride? How many men have been sent to war or to their death to satisfy somebody's pride? Now, like I said yesterday, the missile strike where they were not intending to hurt anybody, that it was obvious that they were not trying to actually do any damage, that it was completely symbolic, that was the best case scenario out of all this, and I still hold to that. But it's horrible that these 176 completely innocent people got caught up in the crossfire. And all I would do is to ask that you pray for these people and their families, and I wish that there was more that could be done, but I think that ultimately we remember that prayer is the greatest thing that we can do, that it's not a last resort, but there's an awful lot of families, Canadian, Ukrainian, and of other nationalities, that are going to be mourning the loss of their loved ones who probably died to satisfy Iran's own reputation and pride. Now, granted, they didn't intend to do this. It was probably an accident. They were just trying to show this symbolic show of force. But either way, that's a tragic way and a tragic reason for somebody to lose their life, let alone 176 people. Well, there was a big shakeup on the Hill earlier, because I know that it seems like an eon ago, because we've had World War III since then, so you can understand why it feels like this almost isn't relevant, or it's a story from long in the past. The impeachment is still actually technically going on. And what's funny is now that even the Senate Democrats are starting to break with Nancy Pelosi on this. Even they're starting to say that the way she's handling it is not helpful, and we need to go ahead and get the ball rolling here. Now, before I get into the details, I want to say this whole thing, they know it, we know it, the whole thing's a sham. And I'm not talking about just her holding back the articles of impeachment, because we know that's the case. The whole thing is a sham from beginning to end, but specifically on her trying to hold back the articles of impeachment until the Senate gives her her way and gives her what she wants and does things the way that she wants to. The whole thing is a big nothing, because here's the thing. There is absolutely nothing in the Constitution whatsoever that requires that the Speaker of the House or the House in general deliver the articles of impeachment. Once they've taken that vote, it's done. Now, there are rules within the Senate that do somewhat suggest that they do have to wait on those. but the rules of the Senate can be changed and be changed by a simple majority. That's not the case with the Constitution. It's not like they would have to do a constitutional amendment to amend the Constitution to change the rules. No, this is nowhere in the Constitution. This is nothing but the rules of decorum within the Senate. And so because of that, I wouldn't have any problem. I'm not saying that it's absolutely the right move and this is what they should do, but I would have no problem with Senator Mitch McConnell just changing the rules and saying that once the vote is taken and the final results are tallied up and we know what the results are, then we just go ahead and move along without them having to deliver the papers, as it were. Which is fine for a couple of reasons. First of all, imagine that this were true not only with the the Articles of Impeachment, but with any bill that the House passed, that the Senate was not able to move on it until the House delivered that to the Senate. You do realize that would make the Speaker of the House arguably the most powerful person in the United States government, period, even more so than the president. Because think about this, if that were the case, then whether it was Articles of Impeachment or any bill that was passed or the budget or whatever, and the Speaker of the House didn't like it, it didn't matter if, 400 people voted in favor of it, the Speaker could say, no, I don't like this bill, I'm just going to let it sit on my desk. Well, then that would mean the Speaker could negate a vote taken by the House, even if he or she were the only person that didn't like the bill, that it was passed in the affirmative by every other person. They could just sit on it and kill the bill. It'd basically be the Speaker of the House's version of a pocket veto. In other words, a bill that the president just sits on, but doesn't actually veto it. He just lets it, sit on his desk without signing it. But the Speaker of the House is not supposed to have any such power. That's nowhere in the Constitution. And the idea that the Speaker of the House can just say, you know what, screw you, House of Representatives, I don't like this bill, so I'm just going to not deliver it to the Senate, that completely destroys the balance of power and destroys the purpose of the House of Representatives, which is supposed to be a governing body, not a single person. And I say this as somebody who has some experience in this. I'm a registered parliamentarian. The chairman in a parliamentary procedure, anything that's run by Robert's rules, any kind of business meeting, the chairman does not have more power than the members. They are a member themselves, and in the case of a tie, they are allowed to vote and break a tie. But ultimately, the chairman has no more power than any one member. The chairman couldn't, for example, hear a vote go a way that they didn't like and say, you know what, I'm the chairman, so I don't care what y'all say. I'm just not going to go for it. Well, that's essentially exactly what Nancy Pelosi is doing. And the irony is it's her party that passed this at her behest. And now she's saying, no, I'm just going to sit on it. You can't do that. If they didn't believe that it was ready, or they didn't believe that it was going to get a fair trial in the Senate, then what they should have done is delayed the vote, not delayed the delivery of the articles. That's just stupid. And Senator Shelby and 26 other senators actually brought up a really good point in condemning Nancy Pelosi today. One of the things that they claimed, and he signed on to this condemnation, that her attempt to control the process of the trial in the Senate violates the separation of powers. I think she's right. I think that he's right. Because you now have the Speaker of the House saying to the Senate, I'm not going to deliver these articles into you until I get X from you. Until you give me this, I'm not going to deliver this duly passed Articles of Impeachment from the House to you. She's essentially trying to get power in the Senate, which the Speaker is not supposed to have. They're not supposed to be able to, from afar, dictate someone who's not a member of the Senate the way that the Senate is going to conduct business. That is not something that she is allowed to do. And I would say this regardless of who the Speaker was. If it were Newt Gingrich or any of the other speakers that we've had, Paul Ryan, John, I almost said the other nickname for him, John Boehner, If it were him, I'd say exactly the same thing. The Speaker does not have that power under the Constitution and was never intended to. And one thing that I do find funny about this whole thing is that the fact that they're hanging on and holding on to these articles of impeachment, it's hilarious because, once again, the Democrats have spoken out of both sides of their mouth and don't even realize it. Because you remember that before the articles of impeachment were passed and this process was going on, one of the things that they were all saying it like clockwork, every single one of them was in agreement. They kept parroting this talking point. Why don't you wait until the election? They said, oh, we can't do that. This is too urgent. This man is an imminent threat to our democracy. Adam Schiff famously said, and he's not the only one, I'm just using him because he was the one that I believe said it first, or the one that I heard say it first. He said, well, asking us to do that is like asking us to let Trump cheat on another election. We have to do this right now. We have to shove it through as quickly as possible, because if we don't, then Trump is going to cheat on another election and steal it. Now, I guess Adam Schiff didn't get his own memo because neither of the two charges that were in the articles of impeachment had anything to do with election interference, but so there is that, but it's almost like he forgot what they were impeaching him for a second. But nonetheless, that was the talking point that they all pushed there. And when everybody on the right was criticizing them for shoving this thing through faster than the flash on a Coke binge, they said, well, we have to do it right now. It's a matter of national security. It's of the utmost importance. Trump is destroying our democracy. We have to get this done right now. And then when it comes time to actually deliver the articles of impeachment, they're like, what's the rush? We'll sit on it for a little while. Whatever. You can't have it both ways, Democrats. You've got to pick one. And when they do stuff like this, it just makes it more and more and more clear that they don't believe that Trump is a Nazi or that he's an imminent threat to our democracy, and we don't even have a democracy, but I'm not going to get off into that right now. They don't believe any of that. Because if they did, if they believed that this was really something that was so urgent that they had to rush it through faster than it has ever been done, then keep in mind, one of the articles of impeachment, the one that's obstruction of Congress, which is stupid because it isn't even a crime, but one of those specifically was lobbied against him. It was brought up because they were saying, well, he's not bringing witnesses to us. He's trying to obstruct our ability to do oversight and to do our job. And they didn't said, screw you, we're not going to do, which, by the way, legally they could have done. But they didn't say to the House, no, we're just not going to participate. We're not going to show up. They said, hey, give us a second, give us some time. And they said, no, we can't wait. And so it was actually part of the articles that they had to do it quickly, and the fact that Trump wasn't moving fast enough was him trying to involve himself in a cover-up. And now they've been the ones that have slowed this to a crawl. Stuff like this just shows over and over again and confirms what we've all known this whole time, which is the whole thing's a sham. The whole thing is a setup. All this boils down to is they don't like Trump. They think that he might win re-election. They want to prevent that, so they're impeaching him. That's all it ever was. And even the Senate Democrats are starting to get fed up with Nancy Pelosi and say, yeah, this strategy ain't working. We need to go ahead and get this ball rolling. For example, Senator Dianne Feinstein, not exactly a member of the Freedom Caucus here, said the longer it goes on, the less urgent it becomes. So if it's serious and urgent, send them over. If it isn't, don't send it over. Man, Senator Dianne Feinstein basically just made my point for me. If it's urgent and this guy really is a danger to our country, like you keep saying that it is, then send it our way, we'll take care of it. If not, don't send it and just let it die. But don't keep us in limbo like this. Senator Joe Manchin said it either needs to start or we need to move on, basically echoing the same thing Feinstein said. Senator Chris Coons said, quote, I respect the fact that she is concerned about the fact that whether or not it should be a fair trial. Man, wordy, Chris Coons. Shorten it up some. But I do think it's time to get on with it. So even the ones that are kind of in Pelosi's corner and not willing to admit that what she's doing isn't working are still saying, oh, okay, let's just get the ball rolling here. They're not willing to actually go so far as to criticize Nancy Pelosi. And they'll even say, well, I think she has good intentions, but let's go ahead and get this thing started. And another thing that another Democrat senator pointed up, I don't seem to have the quote here, but they were saying it's time to turn it over to the Senate Democrats and we'll ensure that there's a fair trial. That's another thing that they're forgetting, is that it's not like there are no Democrats in the Senate. I mean, you have 47 of them. Is it 47 or 46? I forget. There's one of them that's an independent, including Alabama's own Doug Jones, unfortunately. But if you're sitting there scratching your head and saying, none of this makes any sense, why is it that they were all about getting it rushed through as soon as possible and now have slowed it to a crawl? Well, there's a couple reasons. First of all, they know that they don't have a case, and they know that once the American people see this and there actually are witnesses that they don't get to control answering these questions, I think they know it's going to blow up in their face. And that's the reason that they're trying to hold out. I think there's another theory that is plausible, is they wanted to see how this thing was going to shake out with Iran and see if they were going to add another article of impeachment on top of that, which then Donald Trump did a massive victory lap and should have, because he handled this about as well as anybody possibly could have. And I think even the Democrats realized it was stupid to go after him on this. Even they've started to roll back the rhetoric on being pro-Iran now. But the thing is, what it comes down to is the impeachment is not about an abuse of power. It is not about obstruction of Congress. And the truth is, it's not even about getting the guy out of office. Because they knew that that was not going to happen with the flimsy evidence that they had. I mean, that's the reason they rushed it through. That's the reason they faked President Trump's call. That's the reason that they've said that they had things that they didn't. What it really all boils down to, when you get right down to the core of it, is it was about they wanted emotional validation and an emotional catharsis. That's what it all boils down to. They hate Trump. They don't want him in office. They want to pretend that the 2016 election never happened. And because of that, they have done everything in their power for the past really 3 years to try to undo all of that. And what an impeachment does, especially one that was passed by the House, is it kind of validates their emotions that Trump shouldn't be in office. And it gives them a catharsis. It's basically the legal version of the crazy transgender lesbian screaming at the sky at how angry they are that Trump's president. That's what this is. It's done a little more formally, and it's done in a way that it has some legal ramifications, but ultimately that's what it is, because it's not based on anything. And they know that. If they thought they had something through the Mueller investigation, or they thought they had something in Ukraine, they would have put that in there, but they didn't. And really the question that it boils down to right now is, if that's the case, is Nancy Pelosi ever going to bring the articles of impeachment? Because I think there's at least a decent chance that she doesn't. Because ultimately, the Democrats already got what they wanted. They got that validation. They got the emotional catharsis. They can say that this is an impeached president, because technically he has been impeached now. Just like Bill Clinton was technically impeached as well. Now, his actually did go to a Senate trial. But he will forever be an impeached president, just like Donald Trump will be. And so they've already taken their jab. They know it's not going to result in anything good for them. In fact, it will hurt them if this thing goes to a trial in the Senate. It's going to make them look really stupid and really bad. And so I think the smart move now granted, I think the smart move would have been never actually moving with articles of impeachment, but I think the smart move now for Pelosi, if I'm in her situation, is I just let it die on the vine and hope that Senator McConnell doesn't adjust the rules. That's what I would hope for. But I think that is not, I think that might actually be what happens. But really, this should not surprise us about the Democrats. Why do I say that? Because Democrats, they vote on things and propose things in the Congress all the time based on their emotions. In fact, that's about 95% of what they do. Whether a bill is effective or not really doesn't matter. Whether or not a bill feels good or not really matters. I mean, you need look no further than Obamacare. It caused the average household of 4 families their premiums to raise by $2,000. And as far as insuring people that were uninsured, it did insure some, but it also kicked a whole bunch of people off of their insurance, and it made insurance more expensive. So it didn't do anything that it was proposed to do, but it did make them feel good. And ultimately, that's what they were looking for. That's what they wanted. That's what they wanted in things like Obamacare. That's what they do with most of their legislation. And the impeachment is no different. Ultimately, it is about what makes them feel good, not what actually does good or is effective. Let's go to the Daily Dose of Stupid.
That was stupid.
I know it was stupid.
Really stupid.
Hey, I just said it was stupid.
All right, and today's Daily Dose of Stupid. This is a good one, and it relates to what we were just talking to with impeachment. So, Al Green, the representative of Texas, and this is especially true in the House. I think it's true in the Senate too, but it's especially true in the House. There are Democrats that, though I disagree with them, even if I think that their intentions are bad, I think that they are intelligent people, that even if I think that they're irrational or unreasonable, they are not dumb people. Nancy Pelosi, for example, even though I vehemently disagree with her, I think she actually is a pretty good politician, and I think she actually is pretty intelligent. I cannot say the same for everybody in the Democrat House. Al Green is one of those people. I think that other than maybe Frank Johnson and AOC, Al Green may be the dumbest man in the House of Representatives. In this clip, it's a few weeks old, but it shows you why. So this is Al Green appearing on MSNBC with Chris Hayes.
Democrats during this entire affair, particularly since September when the formal impeachment inquiry started. And you play a starring role in those charges. I mean, the argument goes like this of House Republicans and Trump and his allies, the president and his allies, is basically the Democrats wanted to impeach Donald Trump from day one. They cast about looking for a set of facts that they could plausibly use to do it. And all of it was pretextual and reverse engineered to get to this point. Exhibit 1, Congressman Al Green, who's been calling for the man's impeachment for 2 years now. What's your response to that charge?
Well, the genesis of impeachment, to be very candid with you, was when the president was running for office.
Man, you gotta love Al Green. So I love this because the thing is, this would be bad no matter what. No matter what the circumstances surrounding it were, this is a really dumb answer. Because it confirms everything that Republicans have been saying for 2 years now, is that they hated this guy before he ever took office, before anything happened. They were saying we need to impeach him. That's evident with not only Al Green, but also people like Maxine Waters, who tried to impeach the guy before he had even taken the oath of office. The man wasn't even president yet, and she was trying to impeach him. And that's the argument that Chris Hayes just laid out. This whole thing was reverse engineered, that impeachment was already a foregone conclusion. It was just trying to figure out what they were going to impeach him on. Not unlike, for example, a police officer that has decided, I'm going to arrest you. I just have to find the right crime to pin on you so that I can arrest you. I mean, that's reeks of entrapment, and it's not fair. And exactly the same thing happened with Trump. And Chris Hayes asked him about this, and he's like, well, to be honest, it's actually far worse than that. It happened before he was even president. And what makes this so horrible, because like I said, this is a really dumb answer regardless of how you look at it. But what makes it even worse is that he's in friendly territory. It would be one thing if Al Green were talking to your Sean Hannity's or your Laura Ingraham or a Ben Shapiro type or something like that and debating them. This is Chris Hayes on MSNBC lobbing him a giant softball right down the middle over the plate, setting him up to knock it out of the park. And Al Green then proceeds to not only swing and miss, but hit himself in the head with the bat and pee his pants. That's it. That's the only way I can characterize this answer. Because it's just that bad. He's saying, yeah, you know what's crazy is these Republicans out here, they're saying that this whole thing was reverse engineered, and you're the one that they actually try to pin that on. They say, well, he's been trying to do it since he was president. Crazy, right? What do you say to that? And then Al Green's like, well, actually, it was before that. Now, I know what you're thinking. Maybe because Caleb is a media type, and because he cut it off immediately after Al Green gave his answer, that was just a soundbite, that I cut it to make it sound worse than it is, that what Caleb's doing here is he's trying to cast it in the worst possible light because he doesn't like Al Green, and Al Green actually did give an explanation for why he said that, or the way that he said it afterward. Nope. Actually, it gets worse if you continue to play this clip, because then he gives his rationale for why, before the man was ever president, he had decided we have to impeach him. We have to take this guy out. He actually makes that case when this clip continues on. Take a look.
And he had members of his own party to talk about his unfitness to hold office. The persons who were running against him, Mr. Romney spoke of his not being fit to hold office. Mr. Cruz made statements about it. So the president didn't have the luxury of persons from his party having been on his side, as it were, throughout this entire ordeal. Senator Graham has said some very harsh things about the president.
Well, there you have it, guys. Al Green explaining why we've got to get rid of the guy, why we've got to impeach him. The reason we have to impeach him is because when he was running in the primary, the people that wanted to be president that were running against him said that he shouldn't be president. Wow. Well, if we're going by that standard, Al Green, literally every single president this country has ever had, and in the entirety of its history, should have been impeached. The only exception would be George Washington, who, even though he ran against John Adams, basically waltzed into the presidency, and there was really no mudslinging or no back and forth between him and Adams. That would be the only exception. Every single one that happened subsequent of that had people in their own party that disagreed with them when they were running against them. That's kind of the nature of a political campaign. You go out there, you talk about why people should vote for you and should not vote for the other guy. By the way, I don't know if you missed this little detail, but one of the people that was running against Trump, which is the stipulation that Al Green himself put on it, one of the people that was running against Trump that was talking bad about him was Mitt Romney. Do you understand why that's also stupid? Mitt Romney didn't run in 2016. Mitt Romney ran in 2012. Now, Mitt Romney has been critical of the president, but Al Green said it was the people that were running against him, and Mitt Romney wasn't doing that. Cruz was, Graham was, but Romney wasn't. And so there's just multi-layers. It's like an onion of stupid. You peel back a layer of stupid, there's another even smellier, nastier layer of stupid underneath it. You can just keep going. Oh, man, you gotta love Al Green. The guy just makes my job easy. But what's funny about this, you could try to reverse engineer it. You could go back and flip it on its head. What would happen if you had, and I know that this is low-hanging fruit, but let's say that Hillary Clinton wins the 2016 election, which, by the way, if that happens, you can pretty much guarantee that the consulate in Baghdad that was attacked would have been exactly the same as Benghazi, because she was the Secretary of State at that point. But anyway, leaving that aside for a second, let's say that in this dystopian alternate history, that somehow Hillary Clinton won the 2016 election and the Republicans decided to impeach her. Now, there's a number of reasons that a Republican might theoretically in this world be able to suggest that, hey, this is the reason that we were going to impeach her, and then he goes on a show and say, no, actually, we wanted to impeach her before she ever got elected. And on top of that, the reason that we think she should have been elected is because Bernie said some really, really unflattering things about her in the primary. Well, duh, he was running against her. It really is amazing the links that the media will go to try to cover for their buddies, the Democrat Party. They have become the propaganda arm for the Democrats. And what's hysterical about that is this is Al Green being lobbed a softball question by the media who's trying to help him out. Chris Hayes is trying to make the case that the Republicans are crazy for even suggesting that the Democrats were doing this long before Trump ever took office, or at least from the day that Trump did take office. And Al Green goes, no, it actually goes back further than that. It's actually worse than the Republican argument that you're making, trying to give me to smack down. And because Al Green's answer is so monumentally, almost numbingly stupid, remember that this is the case the Democrats are making with a media that is designed to help them, that is trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, that wants their narrative to succeed. If they're pulling stuff like this with a media that's trying to give them softballs and trying to lob up a shot so that they can make an easy layup, can you imagine how bad the impeachment case would look if they did not have a media that was willing to do that? Can you imagine how flimsy it would look? I mean, even more so than it already does. But can you imagine how foolish they would look if they didn't have their buddies in the media at CNN and MSNBC and ABC News and all the other alphabet soup networks? Can you imagine how bad it would look then? Man, you shudder to thought. If Al Green can't even pull off a decent answer with a guy that's trying to help him with it, imagine how bad he would look if somebody was actually doing their job and questioning somebody in power like Al Green. I mean, it's a pipe dream, but I really wish, if you can't even win a baseball game with the umpires are in your pocket, if you're so bad that the guys who are supposed to be the referees, that they're actually pulling for one side over the other, and you still can't win a game that way, you suck. And there's no two ways about it. Let's go to the chaplain's report.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
And our chaplain's report today, it kind of goes back to the story that we did at the top of the hour about the differences in men and women. And we, even though I didn't know that this story was going to come out, kind of talked about this the other day with Abram and Sarai. This was the chaplain's report on Tuesday about the different roles of men and women and how really God put those in place for a reason. And that when we do not adhere to those roles, bad things happen. I want to kind of go back to the origin here, because there has been a lot said about women and women's roles in the church. And I've noticed that there's not been nearly as much talked about in reverse. And what I mean by that is, I think even though doctrinally I have a very clear stance on this, and I believe the Bible means what it says and says what it means, I think sometimes in the church we have a tendency to think that because women's roles are different in the church, that they are less equal, and that plays into this stigma that the Bible or Christianity as a religion, it tries to hold women back or is oppressive. I mean, the thing is, ultimately, I just think that there's a lot more that our women have to offer than just cooking a casserole for a potluck meal. I think that that's true, and I think sometimes in the church, because we are afraid of doing something wrong, we tend to underutilize the vast resources and the good that could be done from the female members of the church. And I think that one of the problems also comes from culture. And by that I mean, a lot of the things that men have the role to do in the church, whether it be song leading or preaching or anything else that is in a leadership role or a teaching role up in front of the church, in front of everybody, I think the issue is we place all the prestige of the church up there. I think that's a problem. I think that's something that we really shouldn't do. And I'm not saying that we should take all prestige away from it, because frankly, I'm flattered when people ask me to go and head the Lord's table or to preach a sermon or something like that, or lead prayer. I mean, those are things that it's good that people trust me with that. I'm flattered with the fact that they think I'm good at it and they want me to do it. That's a good thing. But sometimes I think the issue is, because it's up in front of everybody and we think of that as being prestigious, we don't think of other things as being equally prestigious, like going to visit somebody that's sick or taking care of the children. All things that women tend to be actually a lot better than men at. And because of that, I think that there is an issue there, because worship is definitely something that we ought to put a lot of emphasis on. I'm not saying that we should take emphasis off of that at all. I'm just saying that ultimately, you look at passages like Matthew 25, and you'll notice that what separates the lambs from the goats, in other words, the saved from the lost, it's not who had the best worship or who led the best opening prayer or who was best at giving the lesson directly before the Lord's Supper was taken. All that stuff is important too, and Jesus definitely commands it. But it was who visited the prisoners or fed the hungry. And those are all things that women can do just as well, if not better than men. And so sometimes I think where we put prestige, the things that we are putting prestige on, or the things that we place up on a platform as far as service in the church, maybe that's where the issue really lies. Maybe that's the thing that we really need to reconsider. For one, teaching the children, which is something that women really are 1,000 times better at most of the time. It's a talent that, frankly, I admire because I just don't have it. I mean, I'm terrible at teaching anybody under the age of about 12, and even that's stretching it some. I mean, I'm a good teacher, but I have my wheelhouse, and I know where my teaching works and where it doesn't. That's a talent, and being able to break things down, complicated spiritual matters, into very simple lessons, that's a talent that I just lack. I don't have, and most men don't have it. And that's part of the reason that women do that. And think about it, long term, that has a far bigger impact in the church than anything that is going to come from me leading a great prayer or preaching a really great sermon. That has a much bigger lasting impact on the church. And to talk about these roles, I think that the best passage to talk about why these roles are in place and why they're important really comes from the book of 1 Timothy 2, verses 11 through 15. So,
And now for...
Sorry, I don't know why that messed up. There we go. So 1 Timothy 2, 11 through 15. A woman must quietly receive instruction with entire submissiveness, but I do not allow a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man, but to remain quiet. For it was Adam who was first created, and then Eve. And it was not Adam who was deceived, but the woman, being deceived, fell into transgression. But the women will be preserved through the bearing of children if they continue in faith and love and sanctity with self-restraint. Now, a lot of people would look at that verse and say, okay, men are supposed to do this and women are not supposed to do this. And that's not an entirely inaccurate reading of it. But what's more important is that it gives us the basis of why. You see, a lot of people that haven't done an awful lot of biblical study, they tend to think that these are just arbitrary rules that, people just put in place because they didn't like women and didn't think that they were capable of leading. And because of that, they put these stipulations on to keep women down. That's not what it is at all. You see, God put these in place because he said there are certain things that women are good at and they should do those things. And there are certain things that men are good at and they should do those things. It goes back all the way to our very creation. Adam was designed to be a leader to Eve. Eve was designed to be a helper to Adam. He wasn't placing prestige on one or the other, as I said earlier in the broadcast. The very word helper, when it says that Eve was created to be a helper for Adam, the word in Hebrew means equal. So they were always designed to be equal. But there are certain things that men are going to be better at and certain things that women are going to be better at. And these roles were not just put in place on a whim or at random. They were designed specifically because that's how men and women operate and think and are designed to work. You see, God's the original designer. And so he has insight that we don't into how we are created. And he designed us in a certain way to fulfill those roles specifically. We're given those roles because they fit our strengths. You know, I was having a conversation not too long ago with a Catholic friend of mine, and we were talking about bishops and the role of bishops, and one of the reasons that I was telling him I disagree with the Catholics on this is because their bishops are not married and do not have children. And if you look in the pastoral epistles, 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, it is very clear that to be in the role of a bishop or elder or shepherd or whatever word you use at your church, it all means the same thing, elder, shepherd, and bishop. In that role, you have to not only be married and have a wife that is faithful to the church, you have to have children that are also faithful in the church, and it gives that reason for that in there is that to be able to look after the church, you have to first be able to look after and maintain and run your own family. And he was very puzzled by this, and he said, but Caleb, you've said that you don't know if you'll get married or not, and you may never get married. Are you telling me that with your biblical knowledge and your ability to quote scripture like you do, and frankly, I think he was painting me in too nice a light because there's so much I don't know, that he said, are you telling me that you are okay with just never being an elder? And I said, yeah. Because if God wants me to fulfill that role, then he will provide a way for that to happen. But nothing gives me the right to subvert that. Even Jesus Christ was not a priest of the Levitical tribe. Now, are we going to suggest that Jesus would not have made a good priest? Doesn't matter. God's rule said only Levites fulfill this role. Now, he was a priest in the order of Melchizedek, and the book of Hebrews lays that out very clearly. But my point is, on earth, even though he would have been more knowledgeable than any of the priests and would have been better fit for all of that, he still didn't fulfill the role of priest because that was not his role. That was not the role that God had given him. And he accepted God's authority. He accepted that role. And in the same way, men and women ought to fulfill their roles in the family and in the church because God understands us and put those rules in place to help us and to help us know what roles we will be best at fulfilling. Because ultimately, all of this whole conversation comes down to one thing. Do you trust your Creator more than yourself? Do you trust the guy that designed men and women and designed us with our strengths and weaknesses to complement one another? Do you trust his wisdom? Do you trust his wisdom in saying that only men that are married and have children that are faithful in the church are allowed to be bishops, and only men that meet these certain specifications are allowed to be deacons, and so on and so forth? Do you trust God with that, or are you going to do your own thinking? I don't know about you, but I'm going to trust God. I'm going to believe that he's smarter than me. He has a reason for putting these stipulations on these roles, and if he has, who am I to question that? Ultimately, that's where it comes down with me, and I think that the church and the world would be a better place if they understood that and submitted to God's authority. Stay the course, friends.
Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Any opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media. The theme song for Tactics is 6 Foot Town by Big and Rich. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Broadcast studios provided by Cumulus Media Montgomery. Location studios provided by the Dalraida Church of Christ. Copyright 29.